The stove was warm when I touched it. Not hot, not enough to burn me, just warm enough that my fingers stayed there for too long. I had my glove off because the flashlight kept slipping in my hand, and I remember thinking cast iron held heat. That was the first lie I told myself. Then I looked at the window over the sink and saw that it faced north into timber so thick the afternoon had already gone blue. The house had no power, no propane tank outside, no wires worth naming. Still, the stove was warm. "Hey," Colin said from the next room, "come look at this." His voice was quiet, and that bothered me more than the stove. I wiped my fingers on my jeans and looked once more at the kettle sitting on the back burner. There was moisture on the handle, not dust, not rain blown through a crack, condensation. Then Colin said, "Nate," and I left the kitchen. The place was one of those houses that looked smaller once you were inside. Outside, it had seemed like a miner's family house, 2 floors, tar paper siding, porch sagged hard on one end. Inside, every room pressed in, low ceilings, short doorways, wallpaper swollen from years of damp, a smell like old grease, wet lumber, and mouse nests. The whole camp sat above Black Vein Cut, though I didn't know that name until later. To us, it was just the abandoned rail spur above mile 19. Colin had heard there were old copper fittings still up there. I had a truck, tools, and maybe 2 days between jobs. That was enough. He stood in the living room with his flashlight pointed at the floor. "What?" I said. He said, "Look where you're stepping." There was a boot print in the dried mud by the hearth. Not ours. Ours were fresh and wet, with big tread blocks from work boots. This print was smaller, smooth at the heel, and old enough to have dried in the floorboards. "Could be from years ago," I said. Colin looked at me. "What?" I said. "Mud doesn't stay raised like that for years," he said. I didn't answer him. The living room had a couch with a gray blanket tucked over it. Not thrown, but tucked. The corners folded under with a kind of tired care. There was a radio bolted to the wall beside the window, one of those old railroad units with a cracked speaker grill and 2 empty battery slots. Framed photographs sat face downward along the mantel. That's the part I didn't like. Dust had gathered evenly over everything except the back edges of those frames where someone's fingers had tipped them forward. "Yeah, probably kids," I said. "What kids?" Colin responded. "People come up here," I said. "You know that." Colin said, "Not this far." Rain tapped through a hole somewhere upstairs. It had rained all morning and then stopped just before we made the climb up. The access road had washed down to stone and clay. My truck was parked a quarter-mile below the camp because the last switchback had dropped into a rut deep enough to eat a tire. We had hiked in with pry bars, bolt cutters, 2 packs, and a stupid amount of confidence. The camp itself was worse than I expected. 12 buildings, maybe. A machine shed with half its roof caved in, 2 bunkhouses leaning toward each other like drunks, a cookhouse, a collapsed coal bin, tracks still visible in patches, rails orange with rust, ties sunk into weeds and black mud. And this house uphill from the tracks. That should have been the first question. Why was the family house higher than the others? Why did it have the best view of the camp and the woods below? But at that time, I was thinking more about copper. Colin moved his light over the mantel. "Don't touch the pictures," he said. "I wasn't going to," I responded. "You were thinking about it," he said. I was. Instead, I moved toward the hallway. The floorboards were soft near the stairs. One section dipped under me with a wet sigh. The whole house sounded alive in small ways. Water inside walls. Wind worrying loose siding. A faint tapping from upstairs, too steady to be an animal, too irregular to be the roof. I told myself old buildings talk. I had been inside enough of them to know that was true. The first bedroom had belonged to adults once. There was no mattress, just a metal bed frame and a dresser with all its drawers missing. A woman's coat hung from a nail behind the door. It had stiffened in place. When I moved past it, the sleeve brushed my arm and left a line of dust on my flannel. The closet was empty except for a pair of shoes, both left feet. I called back, "Hey man, you seeing this?" Colin said, "Seeing what?" "Two left shoes." Colin said, "Leave them." It was his answer and response for everything in that house. Leave it. I went into the second room. The second bedroom had been a child's room. I knew that before my flashlight reached the far wall. It was too small for anything else. Low ceiling, cloud wallpaper, a shelf near the window with 3 plastic animals lined up on it, all facing the closet. That bothered me for reasons I didn't have words for yet. The bed frame was still there, but the mattress was gone. Underneath it, snack wrappers had been flattened and lined in rows, not hidden, but stored. I crouched and put my light across them. Some were old enough that the plastic had clouded, some were newer. One was from a brand I had bought at a gas station that morning. I stood up fast. Colin stopped in the doorway. "What?" he said. I didn't answer. My light had found the wall beside the closet. There were drawings taped there, all done in thick black crayon. Trains, tunnels, trees, the house, people standing beside the track. None of the people had mouths. Colin said, "Nate." I opened the closet. The inside walls were covered in names. Daniel, Mara, Eli, over and over. Some low to the floor, some higher. Pencil, marker, pen, years of them. The same 3 names practicing themselves up the wall. One had been crossed out. Eli. Just one straight line. No anger in it. That made it worse. Behind the names, almost hidden near the floor, someone had written something smaller. I had to kneel to read it. It said, "Don't answer if they use your name." Colin said, "Get up." I said, "What?" "Get up," he said. From somewhere below us, under the floor, something tapped twice, then again, then twice again. Colin whispered, "Out, let's go." That's the part I've replayed the most. We said the right thing. We even meant for it to maybe be 10 seconds, and then we stood in the hall, listening to rainwater drip through the ceiling and hit something metal upstairs, and neither of us moved toward the door. Outside, the daylight was starting to go. The sky had dropped into that flat gray you get in the mountains right before dark. My jeans were wet to the knee from brush. Colin's right boot had started peeling at the sole. We'd already climbed up here. We'd already found the place. We had tools in the packs. We told ourselves this was work. We made it as far as the porch. That's the part that I don't like admitting. We were almost outside, cold air almost hitting our faces. The camp was in front of us, gray and wet and empty looking. The truck was down the hill. We could have just gone, but we didn't. Colin stepped off the porch first, and then we both heard it. A soft thump inside the house. Not a crash or a footstep. Maybe a cabinet door closing. Colin turned around. "Wind," I said. He looked at the front door. It was still open. No wind had touched it. From inside the kitchen, something scraped lightly across the floor. A chair leg, maybe. I remember thinking that was impossible because I had seen the chair. I had seen exactly where it was. Colin said, "We leave now." I said, "Yeah." But neither of us moved, because leaving after that sound meant admitting there was something inside. And admitting that meant admitting we had walked through their rooms, opened their closet, read their walls, and talked loudly while they listened. The kitchen went silent. Maybe an animal got in. Colin looked tired when he answered. "Nate," he said, "animals don't push chairs back in." So I said, stupidly, "One more sweep, and then we go." Colin looked at me. "Just the main floor," I said quickly. Colin said, "No upstairs." "Right, no upstairs," I said. He looked at the child's room again, and he said, 5 minutes. The kitchen pulled us back somehow. I noticed more the second time we were in there. One chair sat slightly out from the table, not enough to seem placed, just enough that someone had left it that way after standing up. A dish towel hung from the oven handle. It was gray and stiff, but the fold down the middle was sharp. The sink was dry, except for a sponge. The sponge was dark in the center, not moldy, but damp. I touched the counter near it. Colin said, "Don't." I said, "It's wet." He came closer. I said, "Just barely." He looked toward the back door. There was a pantry beside the stove. Its door had been painted over years before and then forced open so many times the paint had cracked in a white crescent around the knob. Inside were empty shelves and a smell like stale flour. Colin's light stopped on the floor. "What is it?" I said. He crouched. The linoleum in the pantry had a seam around it, nearly square. I would have missed it, but Colin didn't. He had that way of seeing how things were built. His finger traced one side without touching it. He said, "It's a panel." "Is it a root cellar, maybe?" He said, "Yeah, maybe." We should have left then. I know how that sounds. The story keeps offering doors where a smarter man would stop. But that's not how any of it felt in my body. Inside my body, it felt like we were already there, already dirty, already committed, and the difference between leaving and checking one more thing was smaller than the embarrassment of admitting I wanted to go. Colin slid the pry bar into the seam. The panel came up with a sticky pop. Warm air breathed out from below. Neither of us spoke. There were stairs under the pantry. Not a ladder, stairs. Narrow wooden steps dropping into darkness, with a handrail worn pale and smooth from use. I said, that's not from 1998. It's not from recently." The calendar in the kitchen said October of 98. I'd seen it earlier, made some joke in my head about time stopping. Now the date felt less like a relic and more like a lie someone kept on the wall because it was easier than taking it down. Colin pointed his light down the stairwell. The beam caught hanging insulation, damp stone, and the edge of a shelf. Something clicked below us. A small sound, like a jar settling maybe. Both of us froze. "Animal?" I whispered. Colin responded, "Maybe." And then he started down the steps. I hated him for that because it meant I had to follow. The air below was warmer, not comfortable, just warmer than the house. It smelled humid and medicinal, like wet concrete, candle wax, and cough syrup. The basement was larger than the house. That was the first thing wrong with it. It stretched under the kitchen and living room and then continued beneath the back rooms and beyond, dug into the slope with stone walls and timber supports black from age. Our lights moved over shelves, cans, propane bottles, stacks of newspapers tied with twine, water jugs, buckets with lids, plastic bins, blankets, mason jars. Colin walked to the shelves and picked up a medicine bottle. He turned it in his hand. "What?" I said, and he gave it to me. The label was from a pharmacy in Henderson, 40 miles away. The fill date was just 2 months old, the name scratched off. I held it for too long. Colin said, "Put it back." I set it exactly where it had been. After that, we moved differently, slower, less like men checking an old house and more like men inside a stranger's bedroom. The newspapers were recent too. Not all of them. Some were yellowed and brittle, but the top bundle had a county fair ad from that summer, August dates. I remember the smiling pig on the front page. It was such a normal picture that my throat tightened. There were sleeping areas deeper in. Not beds, really. Blankets on old pallets, thin pillows, plastic sheeting hung from wire to separate spaces. Shoes were lined up underneath. 3 pairs of adult shoes, 2 pairs smaller, 1 pair so tiny I stopped looking at them almost immediately. Colin had stopped talking. That should have been a clock inside the story. Every minute he stayed quiet meant something worse. The section at the rear had been closed off with thick, clear plastic, the kind used in construction. It was cloudy from age and fingerprints. Behind it, the space narrowed and old quilts had been nailed to the walls. I said, no. Colin looked at me. I said, we don't need to look in there. He said, we need to know if somebody's here. I said, we do know. He lifted the plastic and went through anyway. As I went through, the sheet stuck to my shoulder. The space behind it was lower and warmer. Blankets had been nailed over the stone walls, not for comfort, but for sound. That was my first thought, and I hated myself for having it. There were buckets with lids, folded children's clothes, a shelf of cassette tapes with dates written on masking tape. Colin picked one up, read it, put it back like it had burned him. I moved my light across the labels. Quiet practice. Tunnel days. Mara, good. Daniel, bad night. Eli, crying, night 3. I stopped on that one. There was a small chair in the corner, facing the wall, child size. The legs had been wrapped in cloth so they wouldn't scrape. Above it hung hearing protection, adult sizes, child sizes. One pair had a faded rabbit sticker on the side. And then I noticed the wall in front of the chair. At first I thought it was stained, and then my light steadied. The wall was covered in tiny marks, short vertical lines, hundreds of them, some grouped in 5s, tallies. Beside one set, in careful block letters, somebody had written, days Eli was quiet. Colin said, we're leaving. His voice had changed, not scared exactly, emptied out. I backed into a hanging blanket and felt something hard behind it. I pulled the edge aside before I could stop myself. There was a narrow door there, not old, built from newer plywood, reinforced from the outside, with 3 sliding bolts, all on our side. Colin said, don't. But my light had already gone through the gap at the bottom. And inside the little room, there was a mattress and a plastic cup and scratch marks around the inside of the door, low enough for a child. Colin said, we're leaving. His voice wasn't quiet anymore. It was flat and decided. I quickly responded, yeah, let's go. We went up fast, not running. Running would have admitted too much, but fast enough that the pantry steps complained under us. In the kitchen, the house seemed darker than before, and I noticed that the chair had moved. I can't swear it was not my memory playing tricks at that point. I want to be fair about that, but I remember the chair being turned toward the table, and now it was angled toward the pantry. Colin saw it too and said nothing. We crossed the living room and went out through the front door into the wet, cold air. The camp looked empty in the way that old camps do, with every broken window staring from its own dark. Rain had started again, light and needling. The trees behind the machine shed moved in a low wind, rubbing branches together. We walked to the truck without speaking. It sat below the final switchback where I had left it, nose toward the road down, windshield filmed with mist. Seeing it made me feel stupid with relief. Just an old Ford with a dented hood and a cracked passenger mirror, something that belonged to our actual lives. But the truck looked wrong before I knew why. The hood was down, the doors were shut, nothing was broken, but the windshield had been wiped. Just one clean arc through the mist on the driver's side, about the size of a hand. I stopped walking. Colin said, what? And I pointed. He didn't say anything. I opened the door and looked inside. Nothing had been taken. My receipts were still in the cup holder, gloves still in the seat. Stale coffee smell was still there. Colin whispered, let's go, start it. I got in. The engine turned over and coughed once, and then nothing. I tried again. Colin lifted the hood and stared down into the engine, and then looked toward the trees. What? I said. The cap's gone. What cap? The distributor cap. I came around. The wires had been removed cleanly and bent aside. The screws were placed on the battery in a neat row. Beside them was a muddy fingerprint. Small, not a child's exactly, but smaller than either of ours. Colin looked at me like I had slapped him. I'm asking, he said, no. We looked at each other. The rain tapped on the open hood. Somewhere up in the camp, a loose piece of sheet metal lifted in the wind and dropped with a dull bang. I said it was on here when we got here. Colin looked at me seriously and said yes. I looked back at him. Are you sure? Nate, Colin said, started this morning. I turned in a slow circle. Nothing moved. The trees were thick on both sides of the road. Camp buildings stood above us, their roofs broken into the gray sky. The family house was partly hidden by firs. One upstairs window showed pale in the gloom. I imagined someone standing behind it. Then I imagined several people. Colin closed the hood carefully, as if noise mattered now. What do we do? I said. We get back in the house. I said, what? It's getting dark. We need walls. I laughed once, badly. You want to go back in there? Colin said, I want a door between us and the trees. That made sense in the worst possible way. We carried the packs back up to the house. The porch boards had darkened with rain. Water dripped from the roof edge in 3 steady lines. The front door stood open the way we had left it, though I could not remember whether we had pulled it shut behind us. Inside, the house smelled warmer. I hate that detail. I hate retelling it. Colin wedged a chair into the front knob and checked every window on the main floor. I stayed near the kitchen doorway with a flashlight and watched the pantry panel. We'd shoved it back into place before leaving, and it was still there. Mostly. One corner seemed to sit raised, a finger's width. Colin came over and we looked at it. Was it like that? No, I said. He said, are you sure? I said, don't do that. He nodded once. We dragged the kitchen table over the panel and stacked 2 chairs on top of it. It was ridiculous. If someone had lived with that entrance for years, a table would not stop them. But doing something was better than standing there with our hands empty. We found an old oil lamp in the living room. Colin had a lighter. The wick took after 3 tries and gave off a weak yellow light that made every corner worse. We didn't go upstairs. We sat in the kitchen because it had 2 exits, counting the back door, and because we could see the pantry from there. Colin had the pry bar across his knees. I had a hatchet from the truck, which felt like a toy after a while. Outside, the camp settled into night. At first, we heard normal things: rain, wind, water running through a ditch, something small moving in the wall. Then, far down by the rail bed, metal struck metal. Not a clang from wind, but a heavy coupling sound. Once, and then quiet. I looked at Colin. Old track can shift, he said. In a rhythm? He said, I don't know. A few minutes later, it happened again. Farther away or closer, it was hard to tell. The lamp flame leaned and straightened. I kept thinking about the cassette tapes. Quiet practice, tunnel days, Eli crying, night 3. I did not want to make those words into a story. I didn't want to give them to people. Colin reached into his pack and took out jerky. Eat something, he said. I'm not hungry, I said. Eat anyway, he said. He chewed one piece until it turned soft and tasteless. Around 9, the first light appeared. Not in our house. Uphill past the collapsed bunkhouse, a yellow point showed in the window of a narrow building. I thought it was empty. It moved once, as if someone carried a lantern across a room, and then it vanished. I stood. Sit down, Colin said. There's somebody up there, I said. I know, he responded. You know? I saw it before you did, Colin responded. That made me feel angry for half a second, then it made me cold. Why didn't you say anything? Because saying it didn't help. And then the pantry made a sound. Small, wood easing under weight. Both of us turned toward it. The table didn't move, the chairs didn't move, nothing burst through. The sound came again, not from the panel itself, but from below it. A cough, soft, wet, and human. Colin stood so quickly the chair legs scraped. The sound was huge in the kitchen. He froze with his mouth open like he wanted to pull it back. I held the hatchet with both hands and we waited. No one spoke from beneath the floor. No one knocked. The cough didn't come again. After a while, Colin whispered, "Back door." We moved together, slowly, stepping around the kitchen table, keeping the pantry in our light. The back door opened onto a short porch and a slope down to the old wash house. Beyond that was trees. The door was locked with a simple hook latch. The hook was lifted. I remembered Colin checking it. I remembered him sliding the hook into place. I was almost sure. Colin lowered the hook again. His hand shook once and then stopped. "No more talking," he said, and we returned to the table. For a long time, we listened to the rain and our own breathing. The first voice came from outside the back door. It was a woman, not loud, not calling for help, just speaking in the low, careful way people speak around sleeping children. "Nate," she said. My whole body went cold. Colin looked at me, shook my head. The voice came again. "Nate, come here a second." It sounded almost like my mother, not exactly, not enough to fool me, enough to make some old part of me want to answer. Colin raised one finger to his mouth, and then the back handle turned once. Slowly, the hook latch held. There was a pause, and then the woman said, still softly, "He said you were the nice one." I couldn't breathe. Colin leaned close enough that I felt his beard against my ear. "She's using your name," he whispered. I thought of the closet wall. "Don't answer if they use your name." The handle turned again, and then the woman outside laughed under her breath, not because anything was funny, but because she had heard us understand. The next sound came from upstairs. It was a single floorboard creaking overhead, then another. Colin closed his eyes. I whispered, "An animal, maybe?" He shook his head once. Something dragged lightly across the ceiling above the kitchen. A soft pull, stop, and pull, like cloth being moved. We had not gone upstairs. That fact kept hitting me fresh. We had not gone upstairs because we made a rule, and now the rule had become a curtain we were afraid to look behind. The dragging stopped, and then a child's toy rolled down the upstairs hallway. I didn't see it, of course. I only heard the wooden rattle, the uneven bump, and the pause when it hit the top stair. Colin whispered, "Don't move." The object tapped down one step, and then another, and reached the landing. It was a small red block, which rolled into view at the bottom of the stairs and stopped in the living room. There was a letter painted on one side. It was an E. I stared at it until my eyes hurt. Colin said nothing. I wanted him to say it was old, to say it was gravity or wind or rot or rats, anything, but he didn't. At some point after that, we discovered the food was missing. Not all of it, only enough to make theft feel personal. The jerky bag was gone from beside Colin's pack. So were the crackers from mine and one can of peaches. Our tools were untouched, wallets untouched, truck keys still in my pocket. Only the food had been tampered with. Colin saw me looking at the packs. "Don't react." "What?" "Don't give them anything. Don't react," he said. Them. That was the first time either of us said it without pretending we meant one person. Near midnight, the rain stopped, and the quiet became too large. Outside, water dripped from branches. The house ticked in the cold. Somewhere below us, under the pantry, something shifted with a slow scrape against stone. Colin sat with his back to the wall now. His face looked older in the lamplight. The pry bar rested across his knees, but his hands had loosened on it. "How many do you think?" I said. He looked at me for a long time and then said quietly, "Enough." The words stayed in the room. I thought about the sleeping places, the adult shoes, the small shoes, the medicine, the newspaper, the tiny hearing protection. the names written up the closet wall as if someone kept practicing being themselves. I thought about the photos face down in the living room. The house had not been abandoned. It had been turned away from itself. At 1 a.m, Colin stood. "I'm going to check the front," he said. "No," I said. "The chair moved," he said, and I looked. The chair under the front knob had shifted slightly, maybe from the floor settling, maybe from pressure on the door. Colin stepped into the living room and followed him with a lamp. The front door was still shut. The chair was still wedged under it. We both stood there, listening to the sounds outside, looking at each other. Finally, we headed back into the kitchen. And after that, the night began to break into pieces. I remember standing there for a long while and then sitting, then hearing whispering beneath the floor and realizing it was only water, but then realizing it was not water. I remember Colin at the sink, vomiting quietly into it with one hand braced on the counter. I still don't remember why. I remember him rinsing it with bottled water, like manners still mattered. I remember a woman's voice outside the back door, too soft to make out. Not calling, speaking to someone else. And then a lower voice answering from farther away. "Don't answer them and don't respond," Colin said. "I wasn't going to. You look like you were." Maybe I was. There's a part of the mind that wants any human voice to become a rescue, even when it comes from the dark outside of the door. At 3 or so, something knocked under the floor. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. And then 2 taps. Colin gripped the pry bar so hard his knuckles went white. I waited for more, but nothing came. The taps weren't a request. That was how it felt. They were a code between people who already understood it. We were only hearing the wall between rooms. Just before dawn, the lamp started to run low. The flame shrank until the kitchen went brown and soft at the edges. The window over the sink had begun to pale. Not daylight yet. The hour before daylight, when everything outside looks soaked and unfinished. "When we can see, we go to the truck," Colin said, and I nodded. "If the cap's back, we go," he said. "And if it isn't?" He looked at the pantry table, then at the back door, and said, "Then we walk." That sounded brave until I pictured the road, the trees, the people who knew every foot of them. The first bird called outside, a normal sound, nearly broke me. We waited another 20 minutes, maybe more. Time had lost its edges. Then Colin moved the chair from the front door. The wood scraped loud enough to make me flinch, and he opened the door. Morning fog sat low across the camp, moved between buildings in slow strips. Tracks below were white and black. The air smelled like cold ash, though I saw no smoke. We stepped onto the porch. The woman was already standing by the tracks when we came out. That was the worst part. She had not walked up. She'd not stepped from behind a tree. She was simply there, like the morning had developed around her. Older, heavy coat, gray hair under a knit cap, one hand around an unlit lantern. She looked at the house first, then at us. "You boys stayed in there?" she said. Neither of us answered. She nodded once, like we had confirmed it anyway. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. Colin lifted the pry bar a little. The woman looked at it and then back at him. "You won't need that unless you make noise," she said. "Who's in the house?" I said. She looked at me for a long time and then said, "Which part?" I don't know what that meant. Colin said, "We're leaving." "I know," the woman said. "They put your truck back." That sentence hit harder than a threat. "Why?" I said. The woman looked tired then, almost irritated. "Because you read the wall," she said. I thought of the closet, the names, the warning. Colin said, "What wall?" The woman looked past us, toward the upstairs window. "Doesn't matter now," she said. "They know yours." From inside the house, very faintly, something knocked twice. and then once, and then twice. Go, she said. Then she turned and walked toward the machine shed. No rush, no threat, just done with us. Hey, I said, but she kept walking. I shouted, who's under the house? She stopped. For a moment, I thought she'd turn around. Instead, she said, not all of them know it's morning. And then kept going. Colin grabbed my sleeve. Move, he said, and we did. Down the slope, past the porch, past the wash house with its broken door, past the child's room window where the curtain shifted once, though there was no wind I could feel. At the truck, the hood was fully latched. Colin opened it. The distributor cap was back, installed cleanly, the wires seated, the screws tightened. For a few seconds, we both stood there looking at it. And Colin said, get in, and I did. I turned the key. The engine started on the first try. Neither of us spoke until we were miles down the road. The tires slid twice in mud. Branches scraped the doors. My hands hurt from gripping the wheel. In the rearview mirror, the mountain road closed behind us, bend by bend. When we finally reached the pavement, Colin said, we don't report this. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He looked straight ahead and said again, we don't. There are kids up there, I said. He said, were. We don't know that, I responded. We don't know anything, Colin said. That's exactly why we should call somebody, I said. And say what? That we broke into a house for salvage and found people living underground? That somebody took your distributor cap and gave it back? That an old woman told us not to talk loud? I said nothing. Colin said, they know that place. They know the road. They knew everything. We just leave them then? He turned to me then. His face had no anger in it. He said, they let us leave. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. In town, we stopped at a gas station, went into the bathroom and washed my hands 3 times. There was dirt under my nails from that house. I had not noticed it getting in there. When I came out, Colin was standing by the truck with 2 coffees. He handed one to me. I said, what was tunnel days? He shook his head. I said, Colin, blasting maybe, cave-ins, train schedules, I don't know. They kept kids down there, I said. He looked toward the road. Maybe at first, he said. That was all. Maybe at first. That sentence has done more damage to me than anything I saw, because I understood what he meant. Maybe there had once been a reason. Maybe the old camp had rules that made sense when trains ran, when blasting shook the hill, when the tunnel was unstable, when families had nowhere else to go. Maybe children had been taken below for safety. Maybe the earmuffs were care once. Maybe the quiet was protection once. And then the work stopped. The train stopped. The men who knew the reasons died or left. But the rules stayed. Some places don't become haunted. They become habits. We drove home separately after that. Colin has left his car at my place earlier. He transferred his tools without meeting my eyes. Before he left, he said, throw away anything you wore. You think that matters? I said. He said, no. And then he got in his car and drove off. I did throw the clothes away, boots too. I tossed my jacket in a dumpster behind the grocery store. For 2 weeks, I slept with the lights on, and then I stopped sleeping much at all. I looked up the camp. That was another mistake. Black Vein Cut had been a rail and mining spur established in the early 1900s. Copper first, then coal hauling, and then timber. There had been a tunnel collapse in 1976 that killed 4 men. Another incident in 1983 involving a runaway ore car, and a fire in the cookhouse in 1991. The official closer was 1998. That date again. There were no records after that except property transfers between companies that no longer existed. No residents listed. No preservation status. No hazard mitigation. No cleanup. On satellite view, the camp was just a smudge of roofs in the trees. The family house barely showed. I zoomed in until the image blurred. I told myself I was looking for proof. Really, I was looking for a reason to believe we had misunderstood. About 3 weeks after we came down, Colin called me. I almost didn't answer. When I did, neither of us spoke right away. And then he said, "Do you remember the stove?" I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Yeah." He said it couldn't have held heat. "I know," I said. He said there was no sun on that side. "I know," I responded, and he breathed into the phone. Then he said, "I heard something when we first went in," and I closed my eyes. "In the kitchen?" I said, and he didn't answer. "Under the floor?" I asked. Colin said, "You heard it too." I wanted to say no. I wanted that very badly. Instead, I remembered standing by the stove with my glove off, the damp kettle handle, the warm iron, Colin calling from the living room. And beneath my boots, before I understood there was a basement, there had been one small sound. A cough. Soft, wet, and human. I had heard it. I had heard it and decided the house was empty anyway. Colin said, "Nate?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't go back." I said I wasn't going to. He said, "Good." And then he hung up. I have not been back. I still take salvage jobs, but I don't enter houses anymore. Barns, shops, warehouses, fine. Houses are different. Houses keep the shape of the people who use them, even empty ones. Especially empty ones. Sometimes when I'm half asleep, I think about that old woman near the tracks and the way she said, "Not all of them know it's morning." I think about the names in the closet: Daniel, Mara, Eli. I think about the crossed out line. And mostly I think about that stove. It wasn't warm because somebody had just left. It was warm because somebody was still under the house while we walked through it talking.